Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's program. My name is Carson Whitenauer, and I serve as the Executive Director for Uncommon Pursuit. And I am thrilled to have with me today Dr. Karen Swallow Pryor. Today's program, we're talking about a pro-life vision for a post-Roe world. And with the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision, Roe v. Wade is overturned. And I know that for a lot of people, that has felt like a shocking and scary decision. It's felt like a disturbing loss of freedom, and it's led to a lot of fear and anger and confusion and uncertainty. And I want to acknowledge that as we get going today. I know for myself, though, it's led to a feeling of joy to know that a major roadblock to the protection of a beautiful human life has been removed. And it opens up a lot of opportunity for our culture to protect and honor human life. But by no means does the overturning of one Supreme Court decision mean that human life is valued in our society. And so I wanted us to get a much more robust and comprehensive pro-life vision, and that's what we have Dr. Pryor here for. Dr. Pryor is the research professor of English and Christianity and Culture at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. She is co-editor of Cultural Engagement, a crash course in contemporary issues, and she has contributed and written numerous other books. She's working on one right now. She's the host of the popular podcast Jane and Jesus, and she and her husband live on a 100-year-old homestead in Central Virginia with dogs, chickens, and lots of books. So count me jealous. Dr. Pryor, welcome to the Uncommon Pursuit program. Would you please just take a second and introduce yourself to everyone watching?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Carson. Thanks for hosting this program, and so quickly too, because this news is really just still fresh. The decision that was handed down last week, and we're all just still, just facing the reality of this good news and this surprising news, I guess, for most of us. You did a good job introducing me. I guess maybe I'll just add that the reason why you asked me to talk about this issue is that the pro-life issue has been a passion of mine for decades now. And it's not something that I have necessarily a personal connection or story to. It's just something that I believe God planted in my heart and just pricked my conscience the first time I ever had heard a presentation from a pro-life pregnancy center back in a church of mine years and years ago. And I remember my first thought during that presentation being about the women. I was sort of shocked and amazed to realize what an abortion entailed and what it does to the unborn child. But I remember thinking, how sad and bad it is that so many women would feel like this is their best choice. And so my immediate response was to become a volunteer at that crisis pregnancy center. And it's just been years since then of becoming educated and informed and just more and more passionate about this issue. And so that's how I got here today. And so I'm just sort of still reveling in this momentous decision. And it's really good news. But as you said, we still have a lot of work ahead of us.
We really do. Yeah, it is your advocacy, and it's been a sacrificial advocacy. And I also feel that you've attempted to bring a gracious and respectful approach to this. And that's where I wanted to start this conversation. We have seen extremely polarized responses to this. Some people have kind of taken a slam dunk in our opponent's face approach to this, and other people have responded with violence against crisis pregnancy centers. And so it has come to the level of vandalism and threats and intimidation in our culture as people have debated the significance of this decision and where we should head as a culture. Now, you've written, even though I believe strongly that those who do not support the protection of human life from its earliest stage are gravely wrong, the same love and grace I have for the unborn must be extended to those with whom I differ too. Sure, such love and grace might take a variant form. They always do from person to person and situation to situation. But I believe that the same Christian principle that underlies my pro-life ethic, that of God not me, as the author of all life, requires that I treat with dignity and respect all of God's children, including those I believe are wrong. So, Dr. Pryor, as we talk about a pro-life vision for a post-Roe world, what does it look like for this conversation to be done with love and grace? And to clarify it and put an edge on it, like, what should we not be doing in this moment?
Yeah, I mean, it is so complicated. There's so many analogies that we can draw that are helpful and some that aren't helpful. And so I might bring up some of those as we talk through this question. Certainly, we think of those whose hands are taking the lives of these children, violating women's bodies. The doctors themselves, we think of them as doing great harm and great evil, and they are. And the women also have some moral agency in this decision, as well as the men and family members and friends who might be supporting this decision. And yet they are all sort of trapped in this cultural moment where we have, as a culture, normalized abortion to the point that most people, not all people, but most people are just morally blind to what it is, in the same way that so many people were morally blind to slavery, and the way that so many Christians did nothing, during World War II, when people were being put into camps and murdered. And none of those things are anything less than evil. But we also have to think about reaching the people who are so morally blind. There certainly is moral culpability, but there also is just this blindness because culture cultivates. And that's why it is so important that we change the laws. And that is so important why we advocate. But we also have to reach the people who are morally blind. We have to reach the people who are making these decisions. And as inconvenient as they are and as wrong as they are, we have to love them. They are inconvenient to us. They are inconvenient to the lives that they are destroying. And yet we still need to reach them. And we do that by recognizing their humanity as well.
Yeah, I think that's it reminds me of the Amazing Grace lyric, I once was blind, but now I see. And if you and I as Christians are going to have that be fundamental to our identity, that metaphor of being blind but now seeing, because God's been gracious to us, I think that leads us to extend that same grace and charity towards others who need sight as well. So, in terms of seeing clearly, help us to see this as you see it. I get, as I read articles on this and read books on this, it's often compartmentalized. There's the statistics, there's the legal arguments, there's the analysis of Supreme Court precedent and decisions, there's the philosophical arguments, there are personal experiences, there's storytelling and journalism. People share very intense and diverse feelings. There's artwork and all kinds of culture made around this issue. And I wanted to give us a chance to see this issue the way you see it. Why are you pro-life? Why should anyone be pro-life?
That's a good question, and it is so complicated. And you mentioned the polarization before, and we certainly are in a polarized culture in our country in this moment right now. And when we think of the polarization, we think of pro-life and pro-choice. But even within the church and within the community of people who would call themselves pro-life or would once have called themselves pro-life, I see a lot of conflict and a lot of ambivalence about this decision. And some of that I understand. I understand the context, the political context in which this decision was handed down. And so I have empathy for that. I'm a very empathetic person, and sometimes it's a blessing, sometimes it's a curse. But when it comes down to it, this little tiny unborn child at whatever stage of development, at whatever size, is a unique, biologically separate human entity. Whatever we want to confer on that being philosophically, religiously, sociologically, there are lots of different options there, but it is a human being, just like the rest of us, just at a separate stage of development. And if we can see that with our eyes, and I think, if we were holding that tiny human being in our hands, would any of us take our hand and squeeze and crush it? I mean, that is just the most inhumane, literally inhumane thing that I think any of us could imagine. Now, of course, that little tiny human being is inside another human being, and that's what makes it so complicated. But really, it doesn't. We can make it complicated. And so for me, I just cannot get away from that simple fact that this is a little tiny precious human being. It is wrong to destroy it. And you know and we have to do all that we can in the law and in our relationships and in our art and in our imagination, to bring forth the truth, the reality of this fact.
Yeah, it's a just a biological fact that the unborn are human beings, and that is something we ought to all be able to agree upon. And I think that so that's at the center of it. Um, Now, one other complication on this is that both the pro-life side and the pro-choice positions, what what I often see is they're framed in terms of individual autonomy. So sometimes pro-life people will speak about, this baby deserves life, and the pro-choice side will say that the mother deserves to control her own body. She deserves a free life. Um, but you've argued that we need a different framing for this conversation, that we need to have a different imagination for our life together and for our society as a whole. And so, what kind of society do you envision that would be a truly comprehensively pro life community?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. There are lots that we could say and read and research on this issue, but I would just say that we have to hold these things in tension. We certainly do believe in individual conscience and autonomy, not just as human beings, but especially as Christians. We believe that even our decision to be a Christian is one that needs to be made by us as individuals and not just simply assumed because we're christened as an infant or something like that. We still have to claim that faith for ourselves through our own autonomy and moral agency. And we also believe that we cannot, enslave other human beings and seize their bodies and control or oppress them, as has been done, unfortunately, throughout history. And that history actually, I think, is part of what makes people sort of swing the pendulum too far in the other direction, because we have erred in history in controlling other people's bodies, especially those of bodies of color or women's bodies. There is a reaction in the other direction against that. But what we have to find is the tension in the middle. We all are owed a certain level of autonomy and freedom of conscience and free will. But there is no way that we achieve that. We would not want to if we could entirely and absolutely. We are all dependent upon one another. We all have moral obligations to one another. In the midst of a pandemic, I can think, we're obviously debating this as well, but I think that we have bodily obligations to one another for me to draw limits on what I do with my body in order to protect other people's bodies. There are all kinds of analogies that we can draw, but nobody would ever say or even be able to imagine that we have complete 100% autonomy. And so if we recognize that the unborn is a human being in the same way, just in a different place as an infant or toddler is, I mean, a person, whether it's a mother or father or some other guardian who has the care of a born infant, has obviously lost some autonomy. There's a responsibility there to not neglect or abuse that child. And so the same is true of the child in the womb. None of us are autonomous entirely, bodily, sociologically, psychologically, emotionally, or in any other way. So there are limits to that idea.
Right. So, what are some of the moral obligations you feel that we have to one another that would represent
Mm-hmm.
sort of a fully developed pro-life imagination? What would we be wanting for each other, and how would we be acting towards each other in a way that would show that we had become a pro-life society?
Hmm. Well, I think that we have to recognize that not only the value of that unborn human life, but recognize the kind of sacrifice or hardship that a mother who is in a difficult situation might be facing, and and not just flippantly assume that this is her job, her responsibility. That also includes giving much more responsibility to the man who impregnated her, regardless of what their relationship is. I've seen people sort of flippantly ask if men should have to pay child support before birth, as though that's a joke. No, absolutely they should. There is much that we can do in terms of both the law and the culture to bring responsibility to bear on those who created this life. But more than that, I think it's just, again, just to imagine for most of human history, the world has been a place where abortion was never the default position. It's not to say that it didn't exist. It certainly has always existed, like all sins and crimes and violent acts of violence have existed. But it certainly was not the thing that most people or many people assumed would be the default choice. Now, the abortion rates in our country, thankfully, have been falling over the past couple of decades for many reasons. There are lots of speculation why, but at one point, at their peak, 1 out of 3 pregnancies in America were ending in elective abortion. Now, that tells you that our imagination had radically changed, changed so much that our behaviors were following, that abortion would just be so common, when for so long people were saying, oh, it just needs to be available when it's, an extreme situation. Obviously, that was not, those kinds of numbers don't reflect extreme situations. And so it's sort of like a chicken and egg thing. Our behavior and our imagination are a cycle. When we imagine certain things to be assumed and default, then our behavior follows. But if we can change our imagination, if we can change what we imagine the outcome of a crisis pregnancy can look like, how that can what the outcome can be apart from abortion, then we can change our behavior accordingly. I mean, that's a very sort of general answer, but I think we have to think about that big picture first, and then start thinking, okay, so how do we change the way we think about it? What does that look like?
Yeah, and it sounds to me like, again, you're asking us to just wake up to the crisis that we're in, where is it currently 1 in 5 pregnancies are ending in abortion?
Yes.
And again, that's extremely high. And instead of saying,
Mm-hmm.
oh, it's lower than 1 in 3, asking a very different perspective, why is it up to 1 in 5? And
Right.
we need to have social scientists help us understand what are the motivating reasons why women are choosing that option. And how do we reduce those reasons and give them compelling reasons to want to carry that baby and have that son or daughter come into the world? Um, so, are there specific policies that you would advocate for that you think would relieve the burden on women who are in a crisis pregnancy or who are seriously considering abortion? That what are some of the ways that that could go from being a scary, frightening, experience where abortion seems like the only choice to what are the things that could help that woman say, I feel the support and the care and the resources I need to have this baby?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think part of what has made the abortion issue so divisive and so polarized in recent decades is that it has also fallen along the sort of partisan
Yeah.
lines. And so the people who are, the party that has been against abortion has also traditionally been the party that is against sort of the social supports that would help a woman in that situation. And I think those divisions, those walls are breaking down. I think that younger people are not fitting so neatly into either party, and they especially in my context where I'm teaching, evangelical Christian college students, they tend to be pro-life, and yet they tend to also want to be more holistically pro-life, and to support policies and economic programs that would enable people to get through these difficult situations more with and flourish more. And so I'm seeing a number of organizations that are, conservative or Christian, that traditionally might not have been as concerned about these programs or policies, but many of them are putting forth some policies that that would support women and men and families in crisis pregnancy situations, but also support the economy and support jobs and support working people. And so I think we just have to get past the old categories of Democratic policies, Republican policies, welfare versus other kinds of programs that would help. There is no more legitimate function of the government, I think, in our tax dollars than to responsibly and effectively help support people through these crisis situations, especially when the lives of these children are on the line. So we need to get past the old party lines. I serve on the advisory board of the American Solidarity Party. This is a big part of their platform, is supporting these kinds of policies, because they are holistically pro-life party, but also want to support families, working families, in ways that can help them flourish, and also would be more welcoming to life when it comes unexpectedly.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true, because I heard the critique, you're just pro-birth, you're not
Mm.
pro-life. And that actually wasn't true of me, but I looked at why that critique was being made, and it seemed very right to me in a number of cases, that the advocacy was for the baby to be born, but not for the child to flourish. And, that's critical. I mean, a pro-life approach is seeing the dignity of every member of the human species and wanting to see them thrive, to see them flourish, as you put it. And I don't know why we would settle for something less than every human being flourishing. Like, why would we want to limit who is flourishing in our society? It doesn't make sense on I just don't know why that would be a policy that we would want to get behind. And so I do think that's got to be part of this renewed imagination and this pro-life vision,
Right.
is wanting every vulnerable person to have a better opportunity, and not just have that be a political
Right.
talking point, but a substantive approach to that person. Um, so how broadly, though, does this pro-life term get stretched? I mean, can we say it includes, advocating for the abolition of the death penalty, or gun regulation, creation care, economic vitality? I mean, at what point do you say, okay, that's beyond being pro-life, that's about some other aspect of our political identity together? How do you limit the stretch and the reach of the term pro-life?
Yeah, no, I mean, the term pro-life, just like the term pro-choice, they developed within a context specifically around the legalization of abortion. Those are the histories of the terms. I mean, if a Martian landed from a spaceship on Earth and had no idea what was going on, they would clearly not know what those terms referred to, because they don't mention abortion specifically. But the political context that we're talking about today, they both refer to positions on abortion. Now, those labels and terms may not be the best ones now. Language does change and evolve. And so, I've said this numerous times before, I have no problem with the term anti-abortion.
Right.
To me, it's clear, it's specific, like I am anti-abortion, and I want to be clear about that. And pro-life is a little bit vaguer. And I understand that, it puts a positive spin on it, just like pro-choice pro-choicers don't want to say they're pro-abortion. So it's really, they are both marketing terms. Let's just be clear. So for me, I don't think every issue is not the same, and the position that I have on abortion is based on principles that I'm going to apply to other questions. but to other issues. But those other issues also are different issues. And so what I think is important is that if we call ourselves pro-life, we have to understand, we have to be clear about the principles that are the basis of our pro-life position. And those principles do need to carry over to other issues. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone will apply them the same way, but I'll just give a sort of an extreme example. We all know that there are politicians or lawmakers who call themselves pro-life and vote against abortion, not out of personal conviction or personal philosophy or religious beliefs, but because they have chosen a party, and that's what's keeping them in office. And we know that that is the case because every now and then something comes up in the news that shows that they, rely on abortion in their own lives. So they clearly are not pro-life. Right. So what I'm saying is that if we consider ourselves pro-life for the right reasons, then as people of integrity, we're going to apply those principles to other issues, even if we land on, different sides of those issues. And so to me, that is what is important. So no, pro-life does not include all of those other issues, but we need to apply the principles upon which we base our pro-life position to all of the issues.
Yeah, so that I think offers clarity that as long as abortion is legal, there is a conversation to be had, an intense one, a passionate one, about whether we are pro-abortion or anti-abortion. And we are both anti-abortion because we see it as an unjust ending of an innocent human being's life. And that is something we should all be able to oppose. And that would really sharpen and clarify the debate, either pro-abortion or anti-abortion. Those terms
or even using the words rights, like pro-abortion rights versus anti-abortion rights, because some people who would say that they're personally opposed to abortion, but they're still in favor of the right to abortion, and I disagree with that position, because I don't think there is a right to abortion, and therefore there are cases such as when the mother's life is in danger where an abortion may have to be done, but that decision is not based on a right. That's a legitimately medical decision, which is apart from just sort of some right to have an abortion whenever you want one, if that makes sense.
It does, and I wanted to follow up on that with you. Matthew Loftus is a ardent pro-life doctor who serves in Kenya. And he was writing about a time where he felt medically compelled to provide an abortion. And he writes about that experience. There's only one circumstance in which I think it is permissible, even right, to kill a baby in the womb, when the existence of that baby is killing the mother, and removal is the only way to save her life. So do you feel that compromises the pro-life ethic, or I think you just indicated it doesn't? Why is it that doesn't compromise a pro-life ethic?
Well, if I can be a little bit of a word nerd here, I am an English professor.
Yeah, I think you're allowed to be a word nerd.
Okay, all right. Because it's interesting, because in the past few days, there's been a lot of obviously discourse around abortion and in the last few days with this decision. And I'm seeing a lot of people seem confused about what the word abortion means. And I don't just mean the medical procedure. I mean, abort means to end something. And it's used in context outside of what we're talking about. Like if you abort a project or abort a program, you're ending it, right? So that's really literally all that abortion means. Abortion is to put an end to something. And so when we're talking about the medical procedure, in the past, before Roe versus Wade, there were often descriptors of them to specify, such as, I used this term earlier, elective abortion, which means it's just an abortion because you want one, versus therapeutic abortion, which was a medically necessary or medically advantageous abortion. And there's also spontaneous abortion, which is what we call miscarriage. So those are all three different kinds of endings or abortions of pregnancies. And In this case of spontaneous abortion, it's completely unintended. It's a miscarriage. No one wanted that. In the case of a therapeutic abortion, it was done for a medical reason. And in the case of elective, it's just was chosen. But with Roe, all of those, or especially the distinction between elective and therapeutic, were eliminated because it didn't matter anymore. It didn't matter if you were getting an abortion for a medical reason or for no reason. So those adjectives, those descriptors, were no longer necessary. So abortion. So all of this to say is what makes abortion wrong is when it is the intentional killing of a human life. And so when a doctor performs an abortion to save the mother's life because if her life is lost, the child's life is lost as well, then that is a completely different moral category. No one is trying to end a life because that is the goal. The same is true of ectopic pregnancies where, where both the mother and the child will die. And so in some sense, I don't know if people are genuinely confused because the words have been carelessly used, or if people are playing word games. I don't know. But it's really pretty simple and clear. It's not rocket science. If you are intentionally killing this unborn child, that is in a completely different moral category than if you are doing all you can to save both lives, and you simply can't. That's different from an intentional act. It's pretty clear.
Right. So, one thing we've touched on that I want to circle back to is one of the really polarizing parts of this conversation has been to say that men really don't have anything to say in this conversation. It's my body, my choice, and women are the ones affected by this conversation. And for men to be part of this conversation is to be part of supporting the patriarchy, to be oppressive, to be theocratic, to want to control women's bodies, to be harming women, and to use our position and influence as men in a way that is really obscene and wrong, to be harming women for the sake of our personal religious goals or beliefs. And contrary to that, I've heard people say, to say that the only thing men can do in this conversation is support a woman's choice to abort might actually turn out to be a rather selfish position for men to take in this conversation. And we need to ask a lot more of men. We need to ask men to be good husbands, good fathers, good mentors, and to demonstrate that a willingness to sacrifice and serve the vulnerable in our society. And so I wanted to ask you, as someone who's been in this for a long time, what do you see as the way men can participate in this conversation and in the imagination of our society in a way that does lead to flourishing, that is truly pro-life?
No, that's a good question, and of course, I think it's clear that to me this is a human rights issue. This is a human issue. It's not a woman's issue or a man's issue. I mean, someone could say that because I am an infertile woman due to endometriosis, that I also should not be able to say anything about this because I'm not going to bear children. So how far can you take that? But it has so often been framed as a women's issue, not only by the kind of pro-women arguments, but it's been framed as a women's issue by men as well. So it's true that some men and women can approach this issue from a patriarchal, misogynistic, oppressive posture, and they have, and so that is wrong, and that yes, and so that's not right either. But if we approach it as a human issue, whether we are men or women, and wherever we are coming from, then we will approach it in a way that gives responsibility to both men and to women, and compassion to both men and women, as well as the child. So, I mean, every issue can be, someone can take the right position on an issue for the wrong reasons. That's true of anything. And anyone can use an issue for their own power and their own agenda. That's true of any issue. And I think the issues that that have affected any community that has been treated as less than equal over human history is more sensitive and vulnerable to that. So it's understandable. It's not as though those who fear abortion being used for power plays and further oppression, those fears are not unfounded, because they have been used that way, and that's actually why some people have concerns about the decision being made when and the way from the court, when and the way it was. It entered a political climate. It was made in a political climate that is characterized by many of these things. So that makes it complicated. And so that's why those of us who are celebrating this decision, as I am, also need to recognize the kinds of failures and fractures and even sins that were part of this, of everything that led up to this decision. The political process is never going to be perfect. I get that. And God is always going to use imperfect means to achieve his perfect end. That's always true. But that doesn't mean we remain blind to that and that we leave those things unaddressed. And so it's really important for us to uphold and celebrate what is good, not just in the context of this issue, but in anything, but also to recognize the things that contribute to something good or that are part of something good that are wrong and need to be corrected as well.
Yeah, I think that's just very honest, and I appreciate the candor, because we do need to have a greater awareness of what sexism looks like and how men can act in ways that degrade the dignity of women, and so that can be identified and challenged and resisted, and also find exemplars who are willing to see the burden that women bear in a pregnancy or in raising a child, and instead of saying, well, that's your responsibility, get to it, with a callousness and an insensitivity. What I want to see is for us to see the little girls and the little boys that are unborn. And I want us to see the little girls and the little boys that are born. And I want us to see single moms and single dads and women in poverty who are struggling with, they already have kids and they're worried about how will they raise another one. For us to see that person and care and have an empathetic response to their experience. Because if we will allow ourselves to empathize with the burden they're carrying, I think that opens up our hearts to carry that burden with them. And that's a very different posture than a triumphalistic, our team won a battle, hooray, let's celebrate with a big steak dinner. That doesn't really do much to change our culture.
That's right. I've heard in the last few days, I've heard people compare the overturning of Roe versus Wade with the abolition of slavery, and wondering why people, we would celebrate the abolition of slavery unreservedly with no qualms, no disclaimers. And why are some people not doing the same in this decision? And I would say, I've actually did say this on one interview, if we compare the way that slavery was ended in America versus the way it was ended in England, which is my time period and area of study, England ended the slave trade without a civil war, and they don't have the kinds of racial and north-south divisions and polarizations that we have in America today. And so even as slavery was ended in our country, the fact that we didn't really win over the slaveholders at that time, we are paying for that the failure to do that still today because of the ruptures that still exist in our country. And so when people, have concerns about how and when in the context that this court ruling was made, there is some legitimacy to those concerns, because if we don't win over those who are going to be making these decisions now and into the future about abortions, about the laws, then we will still, well, we are still facing this battle, but we will be facing it even longer. We still have to win them over in order to win over both the laws in all the states as well as the imaginations.
Wow. Okay. So that I think creates a lot of clarity, because the way in which abortion laws are going to work themselves out are going to vary. There's going to be 50 different sets of that across our country,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then there'll be
Mm-hmm.
further ordinances and all kinds of things happening. And abortion is now possible, through taking a pill, and so that adds another dimension to this.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the challenges to winning people over is with the Republican Party. Often, I mean, this is a stereotype, but often the challenge is to win support for policies that would ease the burden on a pregnant mother, and or on a mother who is um, in poverty or right above the poverty line, already has children, and does not know how she could manage to care for another baby, thinking about food and clothing and education and all of the things that any mother would want to give their child to have a successful life. But if you try and win over someone who's in the Democratic Party, again, a stereotype, it may be that they are seeing this as a right, abortion as a right, even as they do seek government support for mothers in this process. And so, Dr. Pryor, what are some of the arguments that you are seeing persuade people to adopt a pro-life society and to move us in that direction? What are the positions and the principles and the what is it that you're sharing that you're seeing move the needle to win people over?
Well, in terms of policies where I think both parties can find common ground, political parties and both sides, is supporting just very modest family leave for either parent, for mothers or fathers or both, and to help. Again, this is like the Republicans should be taking the lead in this, in helping large corporations and small businesses better support their employees who are having children. We're seeing in the news over the past week a lot of big companies who are bragging that they're going to pay for their employees' travel expenses to go to a place where they can get an abortion if their state doesn't. Now, why? That is such an easy fix for those companies. It would be much harder and more sacrificial for them to support their employees actually being able to have those children, have some decent leave and support during that time. But it's a lot cheaper and easier just to pay the travel expenses for an abortion. And so this is what the huge corporations are doing, and when really I think both parties, both sides should work together to to provide support, more support for those who don't want to make that choice, rather than making that. I guess it's just easy to see why companies would choose that, because they win with that short term cheaper solution. So there are lots of policies that I think we should put forward as areas of common ground that both sides can agree on, and that will result in real tangible support for the people who are making these decisions and whose lives are affected by them. And that's not compromising on matter questions of big government or welfare. These are just modest things that we can do, that we should be doing, and don't compromise anyone's view of government.
Yeah, I wonder maybe if the virtue signaling here is identified because it lacks sacrifice, and you
Mm.
can see that there's a lot of status to be available to announce that you'll cover the cost of employees getting abortions. It would you would lose social status in a lot of contexts to say, in response to this, we're increasing our parental leave to 12
Hmm.
weeks. And we're capping rising insurance costs after the second child. No matter if you have 2 kids or 10 kids, you'll pay the same on your insurance. I mean, a company does not want to have employees with a lot of kids because that drives up their health insurance costs. Um, and so, yeah, the economic calculus there really is interesting to notice. Thank you for that. Uh, so I do think that's a hard part of this conversation, Dr. Pryor, that there's an element of being pro-life that involves sacrifice, sacrifice of money, sacrifice of time, sacrifice of emotional energy. And so on a personal level, how much do we sacrifice here to care for babies and their mothers? This is a life and death issue. So, how do you ever put a stop on saying, look, I could give more of my money away. I could spend more time supporting mothers and children. I could spend more time at the Crisis Pregnancy Center. How do you uh, identify what motivates you to sacrifice in the first place? But second, how do you identify a limit to how far you go to address this issue?
That's a really good question. I think we're just all accountable before our own conscience and before God and before one another, if we care about these issues, to invest in them, to steward whatever it might be. Some people have more money to steward. Some people have more time to steward. Some people have more, just passion to steward. And this is an issue that requires sort of all hands on deck. There are some people who are well equipped to volunteer in the crisis pregnancy centers. There are others who are well equipped just to write the big check. And that's important as well. And others just, to build relationships with young people, with young mothers. I heard a great example over the past week that a church had for a long time had sort of a mom's day off ministry for the what was really just for the women in the church to get free babysitting so they could go off and do things together, and they're going to shift that focus to like single young moms, to give them a break from childcare. There are just so many. That's a small thing, but that can be huge. So we just need to be conscientious and deliberate and intentional about not just giving what we can and stewarding what we can, but even again imagining different ways that we can help. And to go back to an earlier part of the conversation where you're talking about empathy, such a huge difference can be made by our willingness and our follow through to just ask the question, what can I do to help? Because sometimes we have ideas of what we should do, but that's not even meeting the actual need. Right. So we just need to ask and then listen to the answer. What can I do to help? What can my church do to help? Because every community is going to be different. Every neighborhood is going to be different. We need to be responsive in our local situation, as well as, be concerned about sort of the national arena. But we just need to have that posture. What can we do that would make a difference? And then listen.
Yeah. And I do think I appreciate your approach. I'm learning from it. Instead of the two of us or you coming up with grand ideas to save the world, perhaps the posture is more important of humbling ourselves to come alongside and to listen and find solutions that work in that local context and that affirm the dignity of everyone involved in that situation. That's really helpful. So, Dr. Pryor, one of the situations that is particularly grievous, and it's hard to even verbalize it in a way that would reflect appropriate sensitivity, but I'll try. I think one of the more compelling arguments for elective abortion is to imagine, an 11 or 12-year-old girl who is raped by her father or by a family member and becomes pregnant through that obscene, unspeakable violation of her being. And so now she carries a baby within her. Um, how? What do you think about that situation?
That is a very horrible situation to imagine, and there are lots of things that we need to think about. This is a theoretical situation you're talking about, but of course we know that it happens as well. So let me answer this a couple of different ways. Let's imagine a world in which abortion is unimaginable, where abortion, most women, they are we recognize that an unborn baby is a baby, and that we would not snuff out that baby's life any more than we would the infant lying in the cradle. Let's just say we are in that place where we recognize this unborn child as a baby. If we are all in that place, then even that we are going to, that 11-year-old girl and her family and her support system are going to understand that situation differently as well, because their imaginations have been formed so that they see that this is a baby, and everyone wants to do what is right and just for that baby. Now, we are nowhere near that yet, and so an 11-year-old who has that baby, it has been enculturated and conditioned to think differently about that baby than she would in that world I just described. That's why the imagination is so powerful, because we understand the facts and the realities of our lives based not just on the facts, but based on what we've been told about those facts, about the narrative or the story in which those facts take place. And so that's the kind of world that we need to be working toward, is where that experience, that baby is understood in a different way. The other thing that I want to say is that in so many of those situations, the abortion is part of the cover-up of that horrible crime of rape or incest or both. And we cannot allow abortion to be used any longer to cover up those horrible crimes. And so in these hard situations, as they're called, the hard cases make up just the vast minority of abortions that take place. They still end the life of an unborn child, but we would understand the lives of those children differently if we understood the lives of all unborn children differently. And so that's what we need to work toward, and also work toward making sure that preventing that kind of horrible sexual assault. And one way to prevent it is to make sure we justly punish and hold to account all of those that take place that weren't prevented.
Yeah, and I'm going to say something here, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel that rather than, again, entering into empathy for the situation that young girl is in, and finding a whole community of support for her, that to leverage that situation so that other women can have elective abortions really, again, distances us from the crisis that young girl is in. And
That's a great observation. Yeah.
that girl isn't a political talking point. She is, again, someone we want to see with a pro-life eyes and ask, okay, this is the greatest trauma one of the greatest traumas we can imagine a young girl going through. Not how can we twist this for our own benefit, but how can we sacrifice for her benefit? She's already endured great trauma. How do we ensure that her attacker is put behind bars for a really long time? And how do we get her the counseling resources and the other support she will need to recover from this ordeal? And that's just a very different approach. The one that I think is trying to have compassion and empathy for that situation. Well, I know that's a hard thing to consider. One person who registered for the event, Dr. Pryor, asked, what organizations and resources can we advocate for and support to care for women seeking abortions? How can our care be more holistic? Who do you recommend? What do you recommend?
I recommend, there are crisis pregnancy centers all across the country. They have been doing and continue to do the feet on the ground work. And so I don't know of any place that doesn't have one of these centers nearby, and so I would say that's the first place you should look is your local crisis pregnancy center. There are larger ones and some that are have affiliations with larger organizations, and those would be great as well. But I can't, that my own church in my community this Sunday set a goal of raising $100,000 for the three ministries in our area, and that's well exceeded, and it was just very exciting because that's just like putting our money where our mouth is, and that's not the only way, but I think they are just the unsung heroes, and they are the ones who are there, with the people who are in these situations, helping them. They know the details, they know what they need, and the needs are great. I mean, it could be as simple as like a car to get to work. It could, it could be, help with public transportation, help with finding a job. I mean, there's so many needs that someone who's trying to raise a child in difficult circumstances would have, and the whole community together can meet those needs, those very varied needs in a variety of ways.
Okay, very clear. Find a local crisis pregnancy center and make a phone call, send an email, type in the form of their website.
Ask, what do you need?
Say, what do you need? Here's what I have to offer. Great. And I think that's far more wise than saying I'm going to go start something. We should probably join in with people who've been doing this a while. And, a very easy thing to do, well, maybe not easy, but is just to make a donation to those centers. And so, Dr. Pryor, some people, as we wrap this up, would like to know specific strategies for making abortion unwanted in a post-Roe culture. So if there were 2 or 3 habits or initiatives or actions that you would want someone who's watched this interview, they want to be all in, they want to take the next step, what are some ways you would send them forward to take action and make a difference?
Well, again, the first one is contact the local crisis pregnancy center, find out what they need, help them fill that need. The other thing is it is to help build bridges between resources and the people who need them. So often, not just the crisis pregnancy centers, but there are other resources in our communities that people don't know are available. And so just sort of making those more visible, whether it's word of mouth or even connecting your church community with that other resource, it really is about sort of connecting the need and the people who have the need with the resource. The other thing is this is hard, but I said I'm a word person, I'm a literature person, art, imagination. Dig into the conversations. Like, they are hard right now, but do the listening, listen to the people, and sometimes, in a very volatile, hostile moment, maybe it's time to just be quiet for a bit with certain people, but there are other people around you. Have the conversations with your teenage children and their friends. Talk, listen. So many people are afraid to enter into the hard conversations, and I get that, and there are some, as I said, that we shouldn't, but have the conversations. And not in an arrogant, triumphalist, I'm going to tell you what to think way, but again, that humility that we're talking about. Earn the right to be heard by those who don't perhaps trust us right now. Just be willing in both word and deed to earn and deserve the trust that we say we should have.
Yeah, that's very powerful and very clear. I think if I was to sum that up for myself, I would say model what you hope others will do. You have to set the example with our own lives, and then be willing to discuss that in a way that leads to greater trust. And if we can't have that conversation, we're missing out on a really rich opportunity for influence and also just deeper connection to people around us. Dr. Pryor, you have given us a lot of clarity and wisdom, and you have certainly set an example of decades of sacrificial service to the unborn and to mothers and to families, and advocating for a better political approach to these conversations as well. We know that we need the government to be involved in some way in this conversation, and corporations to support families too. If you've watched this and you're thinking, I need help having those hard conversations, I want to be a resource to you, please come to uncommonpursuit.net and register for our online community. You will find a very friendly and hospitable global community. You will find practical training in our courses that will really equip you with the heart and the skills to have those conversations and to further process this conversation. Something that I think will be music to Dr. Pryor's ears is we believe that writing is a spiritual discipline, and that it's as we write that we learn to clarify what we actually think and have, are my thoughts truthful? Are they respectful? Are they helpful? Are they relevant? Writing brings all of that together. And the Uncommon Pursuit community is a place that honors writing as a spiritual discipline. So please check us out and consider joining so you can be prepared for these conversations. Dr. Pryor, there are too many links to enumerate right now, but I'm going to put links to your social media and your website below the video in the comments. I encourage people to check that out and get equipped from the resources you've created to help articulate and practice a pro-life ethic. Thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule. I know you're under deadline with a book that you've got to get out, and it has been a joy to have this conversation with you and learn from you. And so thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Everyone, thanks for being here today. I hope you'll join us again for a future event. And that's it.